The winter wind screamed across the empty fields like it was hunting something still alive. Snow swept over the land in long white waves, swallowing fences, paths, and hope. At the far edge of the wilderness stood an abandoned barn, broken and leaning, forgotten by the world. Inside that barn, hidden beneath rotting boards and frozen hay, a woman lay curled into herself, so thin and weak she barely looked human anymore. Valora Finch was starving. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hands shook so badly she could not keep them still. Deep inside her stomach, a burning pain twisted and clawed, sharp enough to steal her breath. She had not eaten in days. 3, maybe 4. Time had lost meaning once hunger took control of her thoughts. Each breath felt heavier than the last. Snow slipped through the broken walls of the barn and struck her skin like tiny knives. She pulled her torn coat tight around her body, but it did nothing. The cold had already settled deep inside her bones. It felt like it would never leave. Once, Valora had been strong. Once, people came from miles away to ask for her help. Now even the mice avoided her. She dragged herself across the hay toward a small, cracked window. With trembling fingers, she wiped the frost away and looked outside. Not far from the barn stood a farmhouse, dark and silent. No smoke rose from the chimney. No light shone from the windows. No sign of life remained. Just weeks earlier, that house had been full of food, flour sacks stacked high, dried meat hanging from hooks, jars of vegetables lined neatly on shelves. All of it was gone now. Taken. Taken by the same people who once thanked her with smiles and prayers. Valora remembered their faces clearly. Neighbors she had known her whole life. Men whose wounds she had cleaned and stitched. Women whose babies she had helped bring into the world. They had stood outside her door, fear twisting their familiar faces into something cruel and unrecognizable. The town pastor had pointed at the red birthmark on her collarbone and called it the devil's sign. When sickness took 3 children that winter, they needed someone to blame. Valora had been an easy choice. When her husband Samuel tried to protect her, they beat him until he could barely stand. They dragged them both into the town square while snow fell around them. The crowd had watched in silence as the pastor gave them a choice that was no choice at all: leave town forever or burn. That same night, Valora and Samuel fled into the winter with nothing but the clothes they wore. They walked until their feet bled and their lungs burned. They never made it far enough. Samuel did not survive the journey. The cold, the hunger, and the beating proved too much for him. He died in this very barn, his breath growing weaker as Valora held his hand and begged him to stay. When he was gone, she buried him as best she could in the frozen ground nearby. With shaking fingers, she carved his name into a wooden cross. Every day since then, she scratched another mark into the barn wall, counting how many days she stayed alive without him. 32 marks stared back at her now. Valora sank to her knees in the hay and clutched the silver pendant around her neck. Her grandmother had given it to her long ago. It was the only thing she managed to hide when the mob came. She had told herself she would trade it for food if she reached the next town. But the town was too far away. In her condition, she would collapse long before she ever arrived. The wind howled louder outside, like a wounded animal crying in pain. Her stomach answered with its own sharp cry. For the first time since Samuel died, tears burned in her eyes. Maybe death would be kinder than this slow waiting. Suddenly, the barn door slammed open. Cold air rushed inside along with snow and darkness. Valora scrambled backward, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. A massive shadow filled the doorway. She feared the mob had returned, ready to finish what they started. But it was not the mob. It was a stranger. He stood tall and broad, carrying an axe over one shoulder. Snow clung to his heavy coat. His presence filled the barn, like a wall of muscle and shadow. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. The voice was rough and strong, like wood splitting under force. "This is private land." Valora pressed herself against the wall, her throat tight with fear. She barely had the strength to speak. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." The stranger stepped inside and shut the door against the storm. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him clearly. He had a thick, dark beard and arms built from years of hard labor. His eyes moved over the barn, then stopped on her frail shape. "You're from Belwick," he said. The name made her flinch. "Not anymore," she replied weakly. His gaze dropped to her hollow cheeks and shaking hands. Something shifted in his expression. He set the axe down gently and reached into his coat, pulling out a small cloth bundle. When he opened it, the smell hit her like a dream. Bread, warm bread and cheese. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She could not remember. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It does to me," he replied. "Eat." Her hands trembled as she took the food, forcing herself not to devour it like an animal. Each bite felt painful and wonderful at the same time. "Why are you helping me?" she asked between bites. "I'm not looking for payment," he said. "Just eat." Tears streamed down her face as she finished the bread. When she looked up, he was watching her quietly, standing in a way that blocked the worst of the cold. "My mother was burned as a witch when I was 10, he said softly, for growing plants they did not understand. Something inside Valora broke open. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen. "My cabin is 3 miles north," he continued. "There's a fire and more food. You can come if you can walk." She nodded, unable to speak. "My name is Thorley Blackwood," he said, offering his rough hand. "Can you walk, Valora Finch, or will I carry you?" As the storm raged outside, Valora placed her fragile hand in his. She did not know why fate sent this lonely lumberjack to her that night. She only knew one thing. Her life had just changed. The first step inside Thorley Blackwood's cabin stole Valora's breath, not because it was grand, but because it was warm. Real warmth wrapped around her body and sank into her skin like something she had forgotten existed. The fire in the stone hearth burned steady and strong, its orange light dancing across rough wooden walls. The smell of pine smoke and simmering broth filled the small space and made her knees weaken. "Sit," Thorley said, pointing to a chair near the fire. Valora lowered herself slowly, her legs shaking as feeling returned in sharp waves of pain. The heat stung, but she welcomed it. Only now did she understand how close she had come to dying. Life was slowly creeping back into her body, and it hurt, but it was a good kind of pain. Thorley moved around the cabin with quiet purpose. He poured steaming broth into a wooden bowl and set it in front of her with another piece of bread. "Slow," he warned. "Your stomach won't forgive you if you rush." She obeyed, taking careful sips. The broth was simple, but it felt richer than any meal she had ever known. "Why help me?" she asked softly. Thorley sat across from her, the firelight turning his dark beard a warm copper color. For a long moment he said nothing. "Because no one helped us," he finally replied. "When they came for my mother," Valora lowered her spoon. "You said they burned her," he nodded. "They called her a witch when the mayor's son died of fever. She used healing plants." "That was enough." "And your father?" Valora asked. Thorley's jaw tightened. He couldn't live with it. "Took his own life months later. I was sent away. Grew up cutting timber." "I'm sorry, Valora." "It wasn't your doing," Thorley replied. Then he looked at her and added, "Just like what happened in Belwick. It wasn't yours." Something loosened in her chest at those words. She had not realized how much she needed to hear them. "You can stay here tonight," Thorley said, adding another log to the fire. "Tomorrow we'll see how strong you are." "Tomorrow?" Valora repeated. The word felt strange, like it belonged to someone else. She looked around the cabin and noticed signs of a lonely life. One bed pushed against the wall, one cup near a small desk, one chair beside the fire. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "Yes," he said. After a pause, he added, "Not tonight." Before she could answer, a sudden pounding shook the cabin door. Valora froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Thorley's expression hardened. He crossed the room and lifted a shotgun from the corner. "Get into the cellar," he said quietly, pointing to a trap door hidden beneath the rug. "Now." She barely had time to climb down before angry voices filled the cabin. "Blackwood, open up," a man shouted. "We know the witch is here." Valora pressed herself against the dirt wall below. Jars of preserved food lined the shelves beside her. Her breath came fast and shallow. "There's no witch here," Thorley replied calmly above her. "Just me and my dinner." "We followed her tracks," another voice argued. "Then you followed wrong," Thorley said. "Only tracks out there are mine." Boots shuffled. Men argued. Then one voice rose above the rest. Silas Pwitt, head of the Bellwood Council. "We have the right to search," Pwitt declared. "You're on my land," Thorley answered. "Leave." The sound of the shotgun being raised echoed through the cabin. Valora clutched her pendant and prayed. "We'll be back," Silas snarled. "Bring whoever you want," Thorley replied. "Now go." Footsteps retreated. The voices faded. Silence returned. The trapdoor opened, and Thorley offered his hand. "They're gone." For now, Valora climbed out, her legs trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Yes," Thorley said, "but not tonight." She straightened as best she could. "I should leave. I've put you in danger." Thorley stepped between her and the door. "And go where?" "Anywhere else." "You won't survive the night," he said, "and I won't throw you back into the cold." "Why?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "Why fight for me?" "Because I know what it looks like," he said quietly, "when fear decides a woman's fate." Valora sank into the chair, exhausted. "My husband died because of them," she said. "Tell me about him," Thorley replied. She did. Slowly. She spoke of Samuel's kindness, his love for Spring, and the way he believed in her even when she doubted herself. Thorley listened without interruption. "Honor that belief," he said when she finished, "by living." As dawn crept toward the cabin windows, Thorley packed supplies. "We leave at first light," he said. "I know places they won't search." "We?" Valora asked. "You won't make it alone." She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. They traveled north through thick forest, far from roads and towns. Thorley moved with quiet confidence, reading the land like a map. When they stopped to rest, he caught rabbits with practiced ease and shared the meat with her. "Where are we going?" Valora finally asked. "To my mother's people," Thorley replied. "My grandmother still lives. Will they accept me?" she asked. Thorley met her eyes. "If my grandmother does, they all will." That night, as the forest fell silent, figures emerged from the darkness. Men with weapons stepped forward, watching carefully. "Hunters," Thorley said, speaking to them in a language Valora did not understand. After a tense exchange, the men lowered their weapons. "They'll take us to camp," Thorley said. "The elders will decide." The camp lay hidden in a sheltered valley, protected from the worst of the wind. Fires glowed inside bark-covered lodges. The air smelled of smoke, pine, and cooked meat. Valora felt many eyes on her, but they were not filled with hatred. An elderly woman with silver braids stepped forward. Her back was straight, her gaze sharp. She studied Valora as if weighing her soul. Thorley lowered his head. "Grandmother." The old woman touched his face, then turned to Valora and spoke softly. Thorley listened, then translated. "She asks what burden you carry." Valora swallowed. "Tell her I was called a witch because I tried to heal. Tell her I lost my home, my husband, and nearly my life because of fear." The woman listened. Then she laughed, not cruelly, but warmly. She spoke again. Thorley smiled. "She says, only foolish people fear healers. You may stay." That night, Valora slept in warmth among strangers who did not hate her. For the first time since Samuel's death, her dreams were not filled with snow and hunger. But peace did not last. 2 days later, Thorley returned from hunting with a grim look. "Men from Belwick are gathering," he said. "They blame you for sickness in their livestock." Valora's hands tightened around her medicine pouch. "The water," she said. "It was poisoned before I saw the signs." "They're coming here," Thorley said. With ropes. Fear rose in her chest, but it did not control her. "Then I need to face them," she said. Thorley stared at her. "They won't listen." "They will if children are at risk," she replied, "and I can prove it." As torches appeared at the edge of the forest, Valora stood taller than she ever had before. Winter had tried to kill her. Fear had tried to erase her, but she was not finished yet. The rain began to fall as the mob reached the edge of the forest. Torches hissed and sputtered as water soaked the burning cloth, but the men pressed forward anyway. Anger pushed them harder than the storm ever could. Ropes hung from their shoulders. Fear sat in their eyes. Thorley stood firm at the front of the clearing, his shotgun lowered but ready. The people of the camp gathered behind him, silent and watchful. Valora stepped forward beside him, her shoulders straight, her hands steady. "I will speak," she said loudly. Shouts answered her. Accusations flew like stones. Silas Puett pushed his way to the front, his face red with rage. "You've cursed our town," he shouted. "Our cattle are dying. Our children are sick again." "No," Valora said calmly. Her voice carried despite the rain. "Your water has been poisoned." Laughter broke out among the men, sharp and mocking. "You expect us to believe that?" Silas sneered. "Yes," Valora replied, "because it is the truth. The mining camp upstream has been dumping waste into the creek. Mercury. It sickens animals first, then people." The crowd shifted. Murmurs spread. Doubt crept into a few faces. "It killed your children last winter," Valora continued. "Not me." The town pastor stepped forward slowly. "If this is true," he said, "how do we know?" "Test the water," Valora answered. "Stop drinking from the creek. Use the East Spring. You will see the sickness fade." A man near the back spoke up, his voice uncertain. "The symptoms fit." Silas lunged forward in fury. "She lies." Before he could reach her, a half-starved dog burst from the camp. The same dog Valora had once healed months ago. It leapt forward and bit Silas's leg, sending him crashing into the mud. Chaos erupted. Men shouted. Torches fell. Fear turned inward. "Enough," the pastor shouted. "We will test the water." By dawn, sick children lay inside Thorley's cabin. The same place meant to hide Valora now became a place of healing. She worked without rest. She brewed teas, mixed poultices, cooled fevers, and whispered calm words to frightened parents who only hours earlier wanted her dead. Thorley stayed by her side, lifting children, fetching clean water, and standing guard through the long night. Days later, riders returned from the city with proof. The mining company had poisoned the creek. Silas Puett had taken bribes to stay silent. Shame fell heavy over Belwick. Valora was cleared of every charge. Her name was spoken with regret instead of hate. "You saved us," the pastor said quietly. "I did what a healer does," Valora replied. They offered her a house. A position? A chance to return? Valora looked at Thorley, at the forest, at the life she had rebuilt from ashes. "No," she said gently. "But I will help anyone who comes." And she did. Seasons passed. A healing house rose beside Thorley's cabin, built by his hands and filled with Valora's knowledge. People came from many towns. Some whispered. Most thanked her. All left healed or comforted. One spring evening, as the sun dipped low, Thorley took Valora's hands. "When I found you," he said, "you were dying." She smiled softly. "I lived because you stood between me and the cold." He shook his head. You lived because you chose to. They married beneath the open sky, surrounded by people who once feared her and now trusted her. Valora Finch became Valora Blackwood, not by losing herself, but by finding where she truly belonged. They had abandoned her to starve during winter, but she survived. And she became something stronger than fear.